Barakata Yahweh, Barakata Yahweh Shai, Bahasham Rakahakudash Barakatum. First and foremost, I want to give all praises, glory, and infinite honors to Yahweh Bahasham Yahweh Shai. Double honors to the apostles and the elders, the great millstone who rule and teach well. In peace and salutations to you sincere Akim out there, pushing this word in truth and sincerity to the four corners of the globe. May you brothers endure until the end. This is the brother Ra'aya with another video, and I'm going to start it off in Ezekiel chapter 36, verse 5. Therefore, thus saith the Lord Yahweh, surely in the fire of my jealousy have I spoken against the residue of the heathen, and against all Idumea, which is the Greek way of saying Edom, and the biblical Edomites are the so-called white people today, which have appointed my land into their possession with the joy of all their heart, with despiteful minds, to cast it out for a prey. And how did those people over in the land right now get the Holy Land into their hands? Through documentation and legal work, appointing the lands into their hands, beginning with the Balfour Declaration in 1917, and then further cemented with the Israeli Declaration of Independence and UN charters in 1948. And those people over in the land right now calling themselves Israelis are actually Idumeans or Edomites. They're Amalekite Edomites. They're not Yasharallah. The true Israelites are the so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans. And besides this verse right here, just go to any precepts in the Bible dealing with what the true children of Israel would be doing when they were back in the Holy Land, and those Amalekite Edomites fit none of the prophecies, but they do fit the prophecies of what the Edomites would be doing, such as Ezekiel 36 verse 5, appointing the land of the Israel into their hands. And also, when you go into the Bible, you'll see that some of the prophecies that would take place when the true children of Israel were back in the land would be that the nations of the world would no longer learn war anymore. But as we'll see from this clip from RT America's YouTube page titled Report, Israel Training Colombian Death Squads Amid Crackdown, that's clearly not the case. As we'll see in this video, the state of Israel and those Amalekite Edomites have been training Colombian death squads, as well as giving them weapons to oppress their people. And also, during South Africa's apartheid regime, Israel had close relations with that government to get nuclear weapons. And also, those Colombians are actually Israelites of the northern kingdom of the tribe of Asher. So there's another cut. Those Amalekite Edomites don't fit the prophecies of what the children of Israel would be doing when they were back in the land, but they fit the prophecies of what the Edomites would be doing, and that includes slaughtering the children of Israel. This is Micah chapter 4. I'm going to read verses 1 to 3. But in the last days it shall come to pass that the mountains of the house of Yahweh shall be established in the top of the mountains. And in the scriptures, mountains can be symbolic for governments or power structures. And the mountain of the house of Yahweh is the kingdom of heaven being established, beginning with the elect, the 144,000, and the rest of the righteous 1/3. And it shall be exalted above the hills, and people shall flow unto it. And many nations shall come and say, Come, and let us go up to the mountain of Yahweh, and to the house of the power of Jacob, and he will teach us of his ways, and we will walk in his paths. And are you seeing the majority of the planet follow after the ways of those Amalekite Edomites, speaking Yiddish, reading from the Talmud, wearing Shirley Temple curls or a yarmulke on their head? No, a lot of people across the planet are actually against those Amalekite Edomites for what they're doing to the Palestinians and how they're constantly pushing for war with Iran. For the law shall go forth of Zion and the word of Yahweh from Jerusalem. And that's another thing you're not seeing. The laws, statutes, and commandments of Yahweh Bahasham Yahweh Shai getting truly pushed by those Amalekite Edomites. They have their own parliament with separate laws, and also there's kosher pork in the land of Israel, and Tel Aviv is known as Pink City, and it's one of the pride hotspots across the entire planet. Just complete madness. But here's the point I wanted to get to in verse 3. And he shall judge among many people, and rebuke strong nations afar off, and they shall beat their swords or weapons into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up a sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. And like I just said in that clip, You've got the state of Israel training Colombian death squads and giving them weapons, completely not fitting this precept right here of what the true children of Israel would be doing when they were back in the land. Hell, when those Amalekite Edomites really got the land into their hands in 1948, immediately afterwards you had the 1948 Arab-Israeli War, there was the Korean War in the 1950s, the 6 Days War, then you had the Vietnam War, Desert Storm, the war in Iraq, the war in Afghanistan, the Syrian Civil War, the list goes on, and World War III hasn't happened yet. But without further ado, let's get into this video.
Apparently, the U.S. isn't the only country assisting Colombia's military and police forces against demonstrators. There are new reports today from Mint Press that Ivan Duque's government, his forces, are using Israeli weapons on the streets and in the air against protesters. New photos circulating on social media showing Colombian government forces using Israeli weapons, which include high-powered rifles, armored vehicles, patrolling the streets, surveillance drones, and facial recognition technology. So here to discuss this a little further, we're being joined now by former UK MP George Galloway. So George, does Colombia's close connection with Israel surprise you at all?
No, I'm afraid not, and that's a pretty melancholy truth. Israel has long had deep relations with some of the worst dictatorships in the world, and of course with the apartheid South African regime before the liberation and the release from prison of Nelson Mandela. Israel was actually actively cooperating with the apartheid regime to get nuclear weapons. That's how serious their relationship was. But in the long, grim decades of dictatorship in Latin America, with the Chilean dictator, the Argentine dictator, the Brazilian dictatorship, Israel had the very closest of relations. So I'm afraid it's a pity. Many supporters of Israel will be sorry to have to contemplate it, but it is the truth. And of course they do so because the regime in question just might one day come under pressure from Congress in the United States that will no longer be prepared to give them, sell them, the weapons with which they repress their people. And from what you say, there are already the beginnings of that now.
Yes, and according to that Mint Press article, Israel is also training far-right paramilitary groups in Colombia. What does this say then about Colombia, who brokered a peace deal with the FARC back in 2016?
Well, what does it say about Israel, I'm sorry to say, is perhaps the more pertinent question. But what it says about Colombia is that whatever the trappings, Colombia is a brutal tyranny that murders at will its political opponents, and not even just party political opponents. It murders at will the social activists, labor union organizers, tenants.
Does that sound like the nations beating their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks and not learning war anymore? No. Violence continues because the true children of Israel are not in the land right now, but those Idumeans who have appointed the land into their possession are in the land. And so violence, death, destruction, rape, robbery, and murder continues unabated.
Champions, indigenous people, and their champions. It is a murderous tyranny in Colombia. And shame on those, like NATO, who've made them an associate member. I remind you that NATO means North Atlantic Treaty Organization, but Colombia, the regime I've just described to you, is an associate member of NATO, which tells you plenty about NATO.
And, you know, George, since the 2016 peace accord, more than 900 anti-government activists have actually been killed there. Why don't we hear more about this on the news or from our government leaders, whereas you always hear about Venezuela, Venezuela bad, Venezuela bad?
That's a very good point. As a matter of fact, sanctions are imposed on Venezuela. Their sovereign wealth is stolen by Western governments. An imposter is recognized as the president of Venezuela by many governments, including your own and my own. The reality is the situation in Colombia, which is on the border with Venezuela, it's the next door neighbor, is 1,000 times worse in Colombia than anything that could be described similarly in Venezuela. Yet the Western countries queue up to kick Venezuela, starve it, even in the midst of a pandemic, stop it from getting vitally needed medicine and medical equipment.
And who are the Western Europeans or the Americans, NATO and the EU or the United Nations? Majorly Edomites doing what they do best, oppressing and slaughtering the children of Israel. Because again, those in Colombia as well as Venezuela are Israelites of the Northern Kingdom.
Whilst throwing money and weapons and other so-called defense equipment at the tyranny in Colombia, it's a funny old world, Manila.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad that you highlighted both the U.S., your government and my government, U.S. and U.K. governments are so strong against Venezuela because of these alleged human rights abuses there. But as you said, it comes from many years of sanctions use, especially by the U.S. And the U.S.-backed opposition in Venezuela, the violence that they're claiming is happening on the streets of Venezuela, doesn't that kind of pale in comparison to what we're seeing right now in Colombia?
It absolutely pales. I mean, Colombia is a gangster regime. Whatever criticisms you can make of Venezuela, you wouldn't be able to sustain that. They have elections which are monitored by eminent personalities from all the developed Western democracies, and all of their elections are given a clean bill of health. Nobody would claim that about Colombia. Nobody is gunned down in the streets. 40 people in the last month have been killed by the security forces using Israeli weapons and military technology in just the last month in Colombia. As you just said, hundreds since the so-called peace agreement. It's clear that Colombia was not sincere in reaching the peace agreement with the FARC that they did. They did it to put lipstick on the pig of their dictatorship. And now that the world's attention has turned towards Venezuela and many other so-called enemies of the West, the Colombian regime thinks it can do what it likes. And even if America is forced to stop helping them, Israel's there now to step in.
Amazing. George Galloway, always appreciate your insight. Thank you for joining.
Another clear cut to you Amalekite Edomites. You're not the true people, and you, along with the rest of your Edomite brothers and sisters, are about to be taken out of power and go into 1,000 years of hardcore bondage and slavery, building up the kingdom of heaven, along with these other heathen nations under the true children of Israel, who are the so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans. And I'm going to close it out in Ezekiel 39, verses 9 to 10. And not only would war no longer be learned once the true children of Israel were back in the land ruling, but also the children of Israel, beginning with the elect, would actually destroy the weapons of the heathens with spiritual powers, as we're about to read about. And the time frame that Ezekiel 39 verses 9 to 10 takes place in is after the children of Israel are back in the land and the last of the heathen nations' militaries, beginning with Russia or God, go against the children of Israel and are just completely wiped across the floor. And the children of Israel, beginning with the elect, are going to use spiritual powers to destroy the weapons from that battle. And then as we go across the planet and enslave the heathen nations, we're going to destroy their weapons as well. And they that dwell in the cities of Israel shall go forth and shall set on fire and burn the weapons, both the shields and the bucklers, the bows and the arrows, the hand staves and the spears, the assault rifles, the hand grenades, the artillery pieces, tanks, fighter jets, etc., etc. They wouldn't be selling weapon to oppressive dictatorships in South America like Colombia, and they shall burn them with fire 7 years, so that they shall take no wood out of the field, neither cut down any out of the forest. for they shall burn the weapons with fire. And if they're not going to use wood to kindle the fire, what are they going to use? Spiritual powers to burn up the weapons. And they shall spoil those that spoiled them, and rob those that robbed them, saith the Lord Yahweh. The children of Israel, beginning with the elect, enslaving the heathen nations and getting back what they took from us. And at the top of that list are you Edomites. Just go to Psalms 83 to see that fact. So that's it with this video. And with this video, I hope you sincere Akim are edified. Just keep strong and keep pushing this word. We're almost out of this final wicked captivity of the heathen nations, chiefly of the Edomites. And as always, I'm going to say Abad Babal, Kwam Yasharala, and until next time, Shalom.